Well, good morning. It's a Monday morning and everything's got a headache. Nothing's going according to plan. Are we surprised? No, it seems to happen every Monday. Somebody's got to sing for us. Let's try this. Well, it really is a headache this morning. There's a message from Philip, who is joining us this morning because Richard is in court, and he hasn't received anything yet. So we'll try again in a moment. He's standing by. God bless him. Very patient man. Oh, we're all patient with this technology. Sent to make life easier for us, and in fact, what it does is it increases the frustration. So we'll try it yet again. Forgive me if I do it while we're on the air, but yes. Dun da 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 dun da 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 dun da 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 dun da da da. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. I like the sound of my voice, even if you don't. Here we go. We'll try this again. Oh, how likely are you to recommend? Not at all is the answer. Not at all recommend. You're crap, if I may use that expression. There, look. Absolute bollocks. I'm sorry to swear like this, but I mean, really, these people boast what they can do and what they can, and that new innovation says they can't even get the old ones going. They can't even get the old ones going. How many of you suffer from the frustration of something with technology, particularly to do with computers? People boasting about what it can achieve, only for it to go wrong. Yeah, it's gone wrong again. I just I wring my hands in despair. Absolute despair. Let's try again. Monday, Monday. So good to me. Monday, Monday. Good morning, Philip.
Good morning. Nothing has come through on either of my devices.
I've sent it. Oops. Now you've gone all together. God only knows what's happening this morning. It's all over the place. Let's try it again. Well, now here I am back, having farted around because of the system. You'll have to forgive me and forgive Philip, because he's been trying, he's been standing by, and each time we send, it's not coming through. We simply do not know why. Between us, our technical knowledge is such you could fill a thimble with it. Let's just hope that perhaps this last one went through. I really don't know how to check. Everything's fine as far as the camera is concerned, and it's broadcasting. But yeah, there you are.
There I am. Yes.
Yes. I don't know. I've sent the link at least 4 times.
Yes. Well, for some reason, it's all gone into junk. So that was my mistake for not spotting that.
Well, I actually, it doesn't matter how many times you put it. Please let this through. It still goes into junk. I get all sorts of things in junk myself. Anyway, you're here. You're here.
I am a little late through my incompetence, but here I am, and it's just me today.
So I understand, which is great. Good to see you. You have to swear at me instead of Richard, but
yeah. Well, you see, I find that very difficult to swear at you because you're a nice chap. And I tend to agree with pretty much everything you say, whereas with Barton, it's a completely different kettle of fish. So it may get ultra serious without him, because he's just such a wonderful target. But no, so it is just me, I'm afraid. And what I wanted to do, because it's the most recent event of note, I think, forgetting this dreadful situation in the Middle East and the Ukraine, but is the death of Sir Bobby Charlton.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
At the age of 86. Now, his older brother, Jack, died in 2020, aged 85. And Bobby hadn't been seen at Old Trafford for a long time. And the rumour was that he had ever worsening dementia, which may have explained it, but certainly was in ill health. And I was discussing his absence, or vice versa, with a United friend of mine who lives nearby. And, you know, we were saying we hadn't seen him at all, because he was a regular. And he would often sit with Alex Ferguson in the stands. And I remember one time, they weren't at Old Trafford. Ferguson was no longer the manager. I think it was during Mourinho's very unhappy time there. They were at an away ground, and they'd been absolutely thumped. And up in the stands were, the TV discovered this and filmed them. So there was Ferguson, Bobby Charlton, and the chief executive. And it was like something out of Last of the Summer Wine, the three of them. And they were obviously having a very deep conversation about the state of affairs. And then he just disappeared. And you know, we all have to meet our maker, but he was of a generation that were very different from today's. He epitomised fair play, and he epitomised proper sportsmanship and gentlemanliness. He was a very quietly spoken gent, in contrast to Jack, who was a little more forthright. But he blossomed after that dreadful air crash, the 1958 Munich air crash. Yeah. Ironically, he was the least injured, certainly physically, of all of them, because somehow, and he tells this, or he used to tell this story himself, somehow, mainly probably because where he was in the plane, his whole seat, almost like a baby seat in a car, he was strapped in, and his whole seat detached and flew out of whatever exit it was. So he literally slid along the runway in his seat. And compared to the other poor devils, like Duncan Edwards, who was an absolute star footballer and who died of his injuries, Charlton was relatively unhurt and survived Munich. Matt Busby recovered, as we all know, and he rebuilt the side. Incredibly, really, because they had an FA Cup final to play that year. And my recollection is that they won it. But that may be a false recollection. But so, yes, and he represented a time in Manchester that, again, was very different to now. There is... I mean, yes, I'm a Manchester City fan. Yes, I purport to dislike United really very deeply, and the modern United I do. But there was a time when both clubs were very equal throughout the late 60s and into the 70s. And in Manchester, and my mum, who was a nurse, used to tell the story that at Wythenshawe Hospital, in the maternity ward, the mother was asked as she went in to give birth, City or United. And so they had a blue ward and a red ward. And that's what it was like. I mean, I've heard stories from men of your generation, well, men and women of your generation, whereby a Mancunian would go to Main Road one week to watch City, and then Old Trafford the next week to watch United, because they were joking apart Manchester clubs, and although there was rivalry, it was nothing like as bitter as sadly it is now. I mean, you may have read in the papers today that during City's win against Brighton on Saturday, there was some pretty foul chanting going on from some City fans who should have known better, mocking the death of Charlton. And City as a club are just absolutely appalled by it. And they're doing everything using CCTV to try and identify the I stress, small minority, because it was other supporters who reported them to the stewards.
Yeah.
But so he came from a different era in terms of wages, of course. You know, some of the not very good players they've paid a fortune for these days earn more in a day than Bobby would have earned in a year.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's how it was. Of course, he captained the side. I mean, the big thing for Busby was when they won the Europe, the same year that City won the First Division title, because in those days there was no Premier League, as we all know. So City won the Premier League. Typical. City won the First Division title in '68. They beat Newcastle at St James's Park and pipped United by 1 or 2 points. Of course, all the cameras were at Old Trafford. Nobody bothered with City, really, even though they were a very good side under Joe Mercer and Malcolm Allison, ultimately. But Busby's big deal was to win the European Cup, which was then a simple knockout competition. It wasn't called the Champions League. It wasn't a money spinner. It was all about the game and the prestige. And of course, on a night that was very memorable for English football, they beat Benfica at Wembley, Eusebio and everybody, 4-1. And Charlton captained the side, and he scored 2 of the goals. George Best got at least one of the others, but they won 4-1. And I remember, just to sum up how different those days were, the television set, Granada Television, as it was in those days, set up an interview between Joe Mercer and Matt Busby, because Matt Busby had been a City player. Virtually all of his career, he played for City. He was a defender for City. And there was this extraordinary televised chat between Busby and Mercer. City had just got the title, and Busby was full of congratulations to Joe for that. And Joe was saying, well, now, Matt, you know, your season isn't over. You've got to go and win that European Cup now. Now, can you imagine any of today's managers doing that?
Yeah.
It's just unthinkable.
Yeah.
And you can still find that interview on another channel as part of the nostalgia, but it's unimaginable today, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Don't you think that reflects society? In those days, society was a much gentler factor, and today, I mean, you hear vitriolic over the toffs talking about the Tories in Lewis social media. You know, I mean, bitter, vicious stuff. And politics was a gentlemanly affair in many ways. Yes, of course, there's debate in the House of Commons, but I mean, apart from the debate, people got along quite well, and football fans got along quite well. Nowadays, I think that society is so bitter and divided, and that's reflected in football because football is so close to our social structure.
Well, I'm afraid it is. I mean, there's so many questions you raised there. Firstly, we have to remember we're going back to times when there was no social media, there was no internet, there were telephones, there were radios, and there were newspapers, and there were communities. That's the point. I mean, my father, who was a born and bred Mancunian, and his family, who I met of the same generation as a kid, you know, there were proper communities, and they were area by area. His particular area was Cheetham Hill and Crumpsall. but there were areas, and then of course you had the communities broken up generally because of houses being demolished and people being shoved into tower blocks. So you get what we now know as the inner city. And as those communities were fractured and opportunities arose to criticize people more, yes, things became very fractious indeed. I mean, I've always felt, and this is moving into more recent times, I've always felt that the worst thing that ever happened in this country was the Human Rights Act, because overnight the sense of the community was changed at a flick of a switch to me, 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 me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I have this right. I have that right. I may be a serial killer, but I've got that right. Now, of course, I'm citing extreme examples.
But nonetheless.
But it's the thin end of a wedge, isn't it, Keith?
It is.
If you start telling people they're terribly important and they have all these rights and that's enshrined in law, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, in Lewis, this is some years ago now, and I think it was when I was joint head of chambers, and when chambers were opposite the Crown Court there, almost where you're sitting, a load of school kids started messing around initially, and then it got worse in our lobby downstairs before, because the main heavy doors of the chambers were open. Then you had a lobby, then you had the inner secure door, which was glass. But that was the waiting area downstairs. The actual members of chambers and the clerks were one level up. And this bunch of boys from obviously it wasn't from the grammar school because I recognised their uniforms. These were all black blazers, those that were wearing them. And they were an absolute nuisance. And then it got worse. They started kicking the doors, stamping so there was footmarks on the white walls. And then one of them decided to urinate in the lobby. And I went down. They wouldn't budge. They wouldn't shoo off. I said, I'm going to ring the police. Oh, you can't do that. We've got this. These were kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we know our rights. And so I tried to film them and they shoved my arm away. You can't film us. We have a right to privacy. It was just extraordinary. And I mentioned it to my sister-in-law, who is a teacher, and also our dear friends now retired across the way. The lady was a headmistress, a principal, and the husband was a history teacher at a private school. And they said, we're not surprised because it doesn't matter how clever or not these children are. They are told at secondary school that they are basically the bee's knees and that they're capable of anything.
Yeah.
And that they're entitled to stand up to anybody. And that anybody, particularly a man who gets too close, is probably a paedophile, you know?
Yeah.
So that's the generation that, well, has come up and is coming up. I was genuinely shocked that day at how I was treated and what they had got up to in our lobby. I thought it was absolutely disgusting, frankly.
Yeah. I'm shocked too. I didn't realise that sort of thing happened anywhere, let alone in Lewis.
No, well, having said that, when I commuted all that time to Lewis using the trains, I mean, I came across some appalling behaviour. But funny enough, one of the worst, to the extent that I actually wrote to the principal of the school, was a group of, the pampered pets of Lewis Grammar School, in full uniform on one of the old rattling compartments. And their language and what they were talking about, I can't repeat on air, genuinely, but shall we say the main subject was the sexual attractiveness of one of the female teachers, but in very, very graphic, almost adult terms. And I was so appalled that I actually wrote to the principal. And because I'd heard names, they identified the 5 boys. And I don't know what they did to them in the end. They may well have faced expulsion. I don't know. But each of them was made to write a letter of apology to me. I didn't give them my address. I used to use a fax machine. So, and I got these letters of apology from each of these boys for their behaviour. But the school were as horrified as I was, because I actually said, these are privileged kids, probably with a feeling of entitlement, as only private schoolies can have.
Yeah.
And yet, I haven't seen that behaviour from anybody from a state school on a train, ever. But no, coming back to your, as ever, very valid point, football does still reflect a level of society, but it's not a working class game anymore. I don't know whether there is a working class anymore, Keith, quite frankly. And the price, as we discussed last week, the price of the tickets is amazingly high.
Outrageous. I mean, I couldn't afford to go, but more once every 6 or 7 weeks.
No, well, I haven't been to the Etihad Stadium for a long time, mainly because the last time I went with a group of mates. We all shared the petrol and so on in a car. So there were 4 of us in a car. In fact, there may have been 5. We drove all the way up there. It was an evening League Cup game against Everton. It was a fantastic atmosphere. Credit to the Evertonians. They all turned out. We didn't get back till like 3, 4 in the morning. And despite there being 5 of us, including tickets, petrol, and subsistence, it was still over 3 figures. I can't afford that. And I was knackered. I just couldn't get myself awake to go to work. Thankfully, I didn't have a trial, but I was absolutely pooped. And that catches up with you. The older you get, the more tired you feel, particularly the day after.
Isn't that true? Yeah.
And it's just so tiring. And to get tickets at nearby Premiership grounds to see City, it's impossible. Getting away tickets is absolutely impossible.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing has been turned on its head. I mean, the last football match I went to would be about 2 years ago. It would probably be just before lockdown. And I went to watch the Rooks, Lewis. Football club. I forget who they were playing, to be quite honest with you. But I found it quite a pleasant afternoon. Yeah. And because I'm of the age that I am, I managed to get in on granny rates. I was able to get a beer at the volunteer manned bar, which was almost a purchase of from the brewery rather than from a retail outfit. And it was a delightful game of football. I mean, particularly since the standard is not of a totally professional level. Most of these people are semi-professionals. Is the odd pass would go astray, which made it a much more exciting game than watching the professionals, where they're so precise nowadays.
Well, I'm afraid they are. I mean, there are people who say, for example, that Man City are a boring team to watch because they retain possession. Everything is like a scalpel, clinical passing. And I sort of understand that, but I don't see them as boring. I see them as, at the moment, one of the best teams around. In Europe, certainly.
Yeah.
But so the next home game for United is against City at the end of this month at Old Trafford, obviously. So you can imagine what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
You see, they had the 50 years of the Munich air crash. They always commemorate the air crash at Old Trafford. Mostly it's quite muted, but this was the 50th, so this would have been what, 2008?
Mm-hmm.
Sven-Göran Eriksson was City's manager. Ferguson, sadly, was still in place. And there were real worries. And at one about the away fans, about City fans, because there was stuff circulating on social media that were offensive and threatening, you know, celebrating the air crash and so on. So the real nasty end, you know. And there were real worries. There was even talk about closing the away end at Old Trafford. But in the end, they decided not to do that. And in the end, there wasn't a word. It was all baloney from those who weren't there. United provided scarves to each and every supporter, red or blue, scarves that were as they were in 1958.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And they had a 2-minute silence. Wreaths were laid. A 2-minute silence where everybody in that ground raised the scarf above them. So there is a picture of this, again, on a certain channel, other channel, and it's a panoramic view of Old Trafford. And so you have like 2/3 red, and then you have this wall of blue. And then you come round to the main stand. It's quite a moving picture, actually. And there wasn't a sound, not a sound. Now, you'd never get Liverpool fans doing that.
Yes.
No chance.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they behaved themselves that day, but there were genuine worries that it would all kick off. But it didn't.
Have you seen a movie of a stage play called Rattle for a Simple Man?
No, I've never heard of that.
Well, I mean, it's football is of the subplot, as it were. But basically, it's some northern lads who go down to London because their local team. It doesn't actually name the Manchester team, but you can assume it is in for the cup. And that typical lads of the 1950s, you know, they enjoy their pint, etc., etc. And there's this one chap who tinkers with his motorbike, and he's part of the group, but not part of the group, if you know what I mean. And it's their adventures in London on Cup Day, and the reflection is of a wonderful day out and they get in the coach and so on and so forth, and the crates of beer, but it's all terribly, terribly gentle. And I think you might enjoy the subplot too. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but if you can find it on the internet, "Rattle for a Simple Man." I think it's a George Osborne play. Not George Osborne. I've forgotten his first name now. It's about social issues and so on. But it's rather good. But
I will make a point of finding that. By rattle, they mean the old-fashioned football
that's
rattle.
right. Yeah. I mean, actually, just to give you the last line, is that the motorbike tinkerer has a very particular adventure, and leaves London when he's reluctant to do so, and then when he comes back, the last words that he says as he gets off the coach is, "I forgot me rattle." but I just wanted to, before we carry on with the football side of things, is what surprises me a little bit is, and there have been movies about how the gangs and how they actually get ready for Sunday and their punch ups and so on and so forth. But as you know, I can't walk very well anymore, so I tear around Lewis on my little scooter, and I come in at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning. And, I say good morning to everybody that I meet. And most of those people are the bin men and the milkmen and the people you would say, if you like, in broad terms, working class. And they're all lovely. They say hello and they remember me for each morning, and we don't stop for a chat, but it's more than just hi. And the fact that there's that side of things, and then the violence and rather unattractive approach to society that you just described, is there is such a big gulf in between. I mean, you're a man of some considerable experience when it comes to dealing with people. How do you see that, Philip?
Yes, I mean, I have considerable experience of dealing with people at the wrong end of the criminal legal system. And it's very hard to actually pigeonhole most of them. There is, of course, a great wedge of society who, either through luck or something else, behave badly but don't get prosecuted, or just behave badly, whether it's ill manners, low-key violence, petty crime. And I don't have experience of those who didn't come to court or were not taken to court. All I can guess at, like any other member of the public, is that they're either bad or they're mad, or they are deprived and feel that they've got to have what somebody else has.
Yeah.
So we're back to the big I am, aren't we? Really?
Yeah.
It's tricky, and I've been lucky enough, even in my childhood, not to live in what you would call a truly deprived area. So I can't claim a huge amount of experience for that area of society. As I say, apart from the ones who came my way in the courts, and honestly, talk about cans of worms. I mean, the minute you began to get into their backgrounds and read the reports on them, and the drug abuse, the alcohol abuse, the violence in their families, the lack of cohesion, the dysfunctionality, the single parent families, usually the baby mother. You didn't need a degree to work out why most of them were in that courtroom.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they didn't have a choice. Of course, we all have a choice. And over the years, you and I will have heard people of my generation, of your generation, even younger people say, well, I had a pretty tough background, but I don't go out robbing people and burgling houses. And that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. There is just a particular type of individual that is either naturally criminal or gets into it.
Yes.
Is my opinion.
Yeah. Why do you think that they're attracted to football as such? Because that's where most of the violence comes from, isn't it?
Yeah, but they don't watch the football. We're back to tribalism. I mean, you mentioned films and documentaries available here now on the subscription channels that I don't have, but I'm aware of. Films like The Football Factory, for example, and other such titles glorifying the hooligan gangs attached to football. They don't go to the games, half of them, and they arrange using mobile phones to have a fight with the opposition. And in particular, the Football Factory, if I remember rightly, is about Millwall fans.
Yes.
Against West Ham, inevitably.
I don't remember the title, but I think I've seen that movie, yeah.
Well, there are a few of them. It's not just that one. And for the life of me, I can't remember the names of the other two. But basically, that's the subject matter. And the point it makes is these guys, they identify with like Millwall, but they go for the fight. And they are like a brotherhood. They're a gang. It's no different from the non-football gangs. These kids regard these other blokes as their brothers. It's their family. Right. It's about belonging, which they've never felt able to do. And they get sucked in. Like if it is the Football Factory, the particular gang of hooligans, there are older men. There's an ex-soldier. There's an ex-boxer. And these are older men who are grooming the younger ones down to about like 12. Because what they do is they use the youngsters as lookouts. And they don't wear football strips. They're all in so-called casual gear. I mean, there was a time when, what's the name of that type of clothing? Not Barnaby. It's like a tartan. The linings are tartan and the hats are tartan lined. And the place it's a designer label based on Regent Street. But there was a time when these louts were identifiable by what they were wearing. And that was deliberate. And so they would use the youngsters on the bikes, apparently just kids having a bike ride around the area where the fight was going to take place. And they would watch out for the rivals. And all hell would break loose. So it's in my view, it's the tribalism. It's the identifying of violent people with each other against others.
I think you're right, but you hint at the fact that a lot of these people don't have families as such, or not the family unit. Is the breakdown of the family? I mean, it seems to me that people were talking about breakdown of the family in the 1930s, and here we are still talking about it now. But there wasn't violence at football in the 40s, 50s, 60s, was it?
I'm not aware of any. It may have happened in the pubs afterwards with drink. I'm not personally aware of any major violent incidents in football until the mid-70s. That's when it really began, I seem to recall. And then, of course, as we moved into the 80s, it became an absolute disease.
Yeah.
As we discussed last week, didn't we, you and me, in Richard's absence. It was only the scum of the earth that were going to football because they were there with the knives and the batons. And decent people, particularly families, were deserting in droves. They were the lowest attendance levels known to man in the UK in the mid 80s, early to mid 80s. And as we discussed, that was the vacuum that Sky subscription television cottoned onto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's still there. I will not accept that it's all gone away. There are still fights, both in and outside the ground. It's just better policed. And the advent
you think
of
all-seater stadiums contributed to a bit of calm?
Yes. Although I'm not against these new safe standing areas. I am very old school. I don't really enjoy watching a football game sitting down.
Yes, I know what you mean.
And if you watch like Match of the Day or something, whenever there's an exciting moment or there's a possibility of a goal being scored, everybody stands up anyway.
Yes.
They all stand up anyway.
Yeah.
But no, I think the all-seater stadiums contributed to a calmer, or put it another way, a situation where it's far less likely that mass yobbery will break out. But it does still happen, and dear old Richard's club, West Ham still have some very nasty people, as do Millwall. These gangs still exist, and their rivalry is deadly. But I mean, we were talking, weren't we? Richard was talking about Upton Park, the old West Ham ground, which, as he said, was very cosy, to use a nice word. A ground that I used to be taken to by an old friend in my other chambers was Loftus Road, where QPR play. Now, Loftus Road is a classic example of an old school, old style ground. It's all-seater, but it's cramped. You're literally on top of the players. And the atmosphere, it's like a cauldron. It's just extraordinary how these, theatres, these cathedrals of football, old style, the atmosphere that can be created.
Yes. It's interesting, just as a little aside there, Philip, about atmosphere. I've never played in professional sport. I've played a lot of rugby and done other things as an amateur. But I remember once as a reporter, I had to go and cover the athletic meeting of the joint schools in Vancouver, which was held in what was then the main stadium, Empire Stadium, which was built for the Empire Games. And I had to walk out onto the centre to interview the shot putter or whatever. And when I went out, the blast of sound and the lights and so on hit me, and I was dazed. And it was just emotion, sound, and so on that came. and I was only there just to walk out and say, you know, how old are you and so on. Footballers must go through that every week, or 2 or 3 times a week, where when they walk out of that tunnel or run out of that tunnel, that they're hit with all this emotion and so on. So I would imagine that it's created also in the atmosphere in the stadium themselves.
Yes, I mean, it's not just football. It's the same with rugby. You know, Twickenham, Murrayfield, Millennium Stadium, where I've been to watch a football game, and it's pretty impressive. And well, Dublin, of course. But no, I take your point. I've never had that experience in the middle of in the centre circle, as it were. But yeah, they have to get used to that. I mean, I think the worst. I watched a programme not that long ago about a British football fan who was invited to do half a season in Turkey following one of the Istanbul sides. It wasn't Galatasaray. I think it was Besiktas, but doesn't matter. And I watched this programme. I mean, fascinated is too nice a word. I mean, they are absolutely bonkers. And even he, as a fervent British, I think he was a West Ham fan, actually, he would film himself amongst these people on these, well, we would call them ultras, but the Turks call them something else. And there are people in the crowd who are just cheerleaders. They've got drums, you name it, and they have their back to the game. What they are doing is they are literally orchestrating the rest of their cohorts to make as much noise as possible. I mean, and it took me back to when Leeds United were very successful in Europe. They had to play Galatasaray in Istanbul, and it was televised. So we're talking years ago, and I couldn't believe what I was watching. And even the television managed to convey this. Huge signs around the stadium in English saying "Welcome to Hell," and the players had to come up from underground. So there were subterranean dressing rooms, and as the Leeds players emerged, they were escorted by riot police with shields, like an old Roman centurion's, you know, defense, like a tortoise shell effect, with the shields all interlocked, because the minute they appeared, they were showered with bottles, stones. It was horrific.
Yeah, astonishing.
And the match went ahead. I think they lost quite heavily, but how on earth you can play any form of natural game in that arena, I failed to see.
And yet I understand that. I mean, you know, at Twickenham now, they sort of encourage the crowd, get behind the team, make a lot of noise. I suppose they do it in football too. So it's not totally outside the sports culture, is it?
No. I mean, the stadium, the London Stadium, which Richard won't go to, where West Ham now play, they always play "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles" before a game, and they have machines that literally blow bubbles into the air. Yeah, it's hilarious to watch. You know, at the Etihad, they will always play "Blue Moon" at least once before a game. I don't know what they do at Old Trafford. Probably not very much, really. But yeah, Liverpool, Anfield, you'll never walk alone. And of course, at the rugby, England, Twickenham for England, of course, it's swing low, sweet chariot.
Chariot, yes, yes, yes.
And had England got to the final against the Kiwis, I'm glad they didn't, because they would have got absolutely smashed. But had they got to the final, every time the Kiwis do a haka, which I think is one of the most insulting, spit in your eye events in modern sport, but that's just my opinion. The minute the haka starts, England fans en masse try and drown the haka out by belting out as loud as possible, swing low. Now, you told that story about the rugby team in Canada.
Yes.
That danced Ring the Ring the Roses.
That's right.
And that's so funny. Well, what occurred to me was what the England players in future should do is, as the crowd are belting out Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, the players should do the motions to that song. So that would be an English haka.
Yes.
I don't know why they don't do it, because, you know, I think that anybody facing the haka should just give two fingers to it. It's it's ridiculous.
Of course, Richard, the RFU are known as being, as Will Carling called them, old farts.
Yes, he did.
And if you recall, Richard Cockerell went up and did this with his English shirt and got his fingers burned by the RFU. You know,
correct.
Do that old chap. You know, we don't do that sort of thing.
No, I remember that, and I remember Carling calling them that, and he was probably right.
Yes. Oh, I think he is. I mean, I have to be careful how I make a comparison, but for a brief period, I was the secretary of the British Columbia Rugby Football Union.
Were you?
Yeah, which was a fairly responsible union, because we were playing international matches, and I was quite regularly, and it was very high level sport. And I must confess is this is Canada, which is a bit more liberal thinking than we are about a lot of things. Is even there they were quite stuffy and very careful about what they would do and what they wouldn't do. So I think that he probably was right, and that these things don't move on as fast as we would like.
Yeah, because everybody takes themselves very seriously.
Yeah.
And if you do that, if, to use my favourite phrase, if you are a legend in your own mind, you're not open to change.
The interesting thing is, though, I remember when I first came back from Northern Ireland, and I was commuting to London from Lewis, and perhaps the first Christmas, the coach that I always got into, it was all decorated with balloons and so on and so forth, and they had a recording thing and so on, and they played carols all the way. And on the way back, things got a bit emotional and so on. And this one girl was supposed to get off at Lewis, but she was enjoying the music and the emotion so much, she decided she would go to Hastings and then come back. But if you could get carried away like that in a railway carriage, can you imagine what it's like in a football stadium?
Well, as I think I've mentioned before, for many years I was part of a very, very regular group of commuters, and it was in the days of the old buffet cars, and every Christmas there would be a party on the way up, and then in the buffet car on the way back. So I did always get off at Arundel. I didn't carry on to Bognor. because that would have deflated me.
I'm sure.
You know,
Richard, we've been going for an hour and 32 seconds. Would you believe?
yes, I can believe it. It's gone, I hope, interestingly for your viewers.
I mean, it's fascinating, and I think that your injection of the chat from time to time about football is because in many ways, as you say, football isn't just a sport anymore. It's a tribal affair, and it has a great impact on our social environment. And I think that it bears talking about from time to time, both in sports terms, starting off with what a gentleman Charlton was, down to now let's bash their brains in. I think that there are, as they would say in the Foreign Office or in Downing Street, there are lessons to be learned. But I think that there is a reflection from football on every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, I cannot disagree with that. Very much food for thought. Well, I will see you Friday.
I look forward to that.
It may well be the case Richard is now starting is pretty involved. I know he'll do his utmost to be with us on Friday, but the man and his dog will have to gird his loins and screw his courage to the sticking point to face just me again.
Well, actually, quite by accident, I bumped into him yesterday, taking Jed for a walk, and he really did look bowed. He looks as if he got the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Well,
he has.
He takes his job extremely seriously. I mean, prosecuting is a heavy burden, and you have to do so much work in preparation by the time you get near a court. And I know that he'd inherited this case that starts today, and a lot needed doing. And had he had it from the outset, it would have been done. So he had to really put a shift in over the weekend and this morning. Yeah, well, if he were here, he would say to you, Keith, the reason nobody stops and chats with you is that you're going so bloody fast in the Red Devil that they may want to chat, but you've gone. You've disappeared into the ether, vanished into thin air. Anyway, on that note,
I didn't want it.
On that note, I will leave you and see you Friday.
I shall look forward to it, Philip, and I've enjoyed our chat this morning, and I'm quite sure that a large percentage of our viewership have enjoyed it too, because it strikes chords all the way around. See you Friday.
Good. Take care now.
Bye. All right. That's Philip, just one of the two Bs. The one B is very busy in court at the moment on a very serious case, and of course we don't mention it because we don't want to endanger Richard in any way. I was a bit amused when he said last week is that because one of the reasons that they like to keep their wig is that often the person that they're prosecuting and the witnesses, and particularly hostile witnesses, don't recognize them in the street because they haven't got their wig on. But certainly we don't want to in any way impair the very fine work that he does. And I may say that we are very, very lucky to have Richard as a member of our team because he is held in the very highest regard throughout the judicial system in the United Kingdom. So let's give him a plug while he's not here. And Philip, indeed, was similar when he was practicing. So we really try to bring you the highest level of what should you say, practitioner in everything that we do. And we Harry Atherton, who's coming up at 10 o'clock this morning. He's been to so many countries in the world, so he's able to speak authoritatively on travel, background, environment, governments, history. We've got Mark Maybe, who is only just retired, a professor, and who's been a principal of some universities in London and the North. And we've got John Henry, who was really the first voice to be heard on Radio Brighton. So we do bring you people with experience and with knowledge. And if sometimes you don't agree with what we say, at least you know we say it based on not just a frippery. Enough of that. I'll be back in a few minutes to take a look at the headlines with you. For the moment, let's just take a break.